On the 8th of February 1953, a B-29 took off from Hanscom Air Force Base near Boston, Massachusetts, to fly to Los Angeles, California, a journey of approximately 2,600 miles or 4,290 kilometers, and a 12-hour flight time. But this would be no ordinary flight. This flight will be the first to use an inertial navigation system to fly the plane along a pre-programmed route using no pilot, external signals or star guidance, just an inertial reference frame using gyroscopes, accelerometers and gravity. However, this was not an easy thing for some to accept, with some of the most influential scientists in the field saying that a black box solution that was completely independent of external information could never work. And yet today, this is the basis of independent guidance for rockets, missiles, spacecraft, drones, UAVs, ships, and even submarines. This is the flight that changed navigation forever and kicked off the miniaturization of electronics that power the world today. Much like a guidance system, keeping yourself on track on the internet is a difficult task, with an increasing number of companies, marketeers and government agencies looking to track your every move, harvest your data and threaten your privacy. But there are ways to counter these threats. NordVPN combines both threat protection features with a VPN service to hide your computer's real IP address and make it much more difficult for hackers to gain access to your computer, but also stop trackers, block malware and intrusive ads. NordVPN also encrypts everything you send over it, making it ideal for mobile apps when you don't know if an app is using the secure HTTPS protocol, and it can be used on up to 6 devices at once. If you find yourself being blocked from websites or services just because you're from another country, NordVPN can make you look like you're from almost anywhere, so you can view sports channels, movies and TV that you might not have access to in your country. Nord also has features like Auto Connect and Kill Switch, so that should you forget to start or turn off the VPN, you won't accidentally reveal your true IP address and location. Act now and you can get Nord's 2-year deal plus 4 months extra free by using the link nordvpn.com/CuriousDroid, which is at the top of the description below, and there's even a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's risk-free as well. The idea of an autopilot to fly a plane independently of a human has been around for almost as long as the aircraft themselves, with the first autopilot being developed by the Sperry Corporation in 1912 and first demonstrated in 1914 by the founder's son, Lawrence Sperry, in Paris. With aircraft at the time becoming more powerful and being able to cover longer distances, the flight times were getting longer and longer and becoming more fatiguing for the pilots. The Sperry system was not a full autopilot as we think of today, but more of an assistant to help keep the plane level and on the correct heading, greatly reducing the pilot's workload. It did this by connecting a gyroscopic heading and attitude indicator via hydraulic controls to the elevators and rudder. This allowed Lawrence to fly with his hands away from the controls and visible to onlookers. By 1930, Sperry had a system that could keep an aircraft on the straight and level for up to 3 hours. As time went by and extra instruments were added like radio navigation, planes could fly in the dark and in bad weather, but this also meant they had to rely on an external source, and for military aircraft on combat missions deep into enemy territory where signals could be jammed, that was a problem. This was a problem that Charles Stark, Doc Draper, had been thinking about since the early 1930s, and by 1945 he was the director of the MIT Instrumentation Lab. He'd been working on the A-1 gyroscopically stabilized radar gun with Colonel Lee Davis when the news of Japan's surrender and the end of World War II came through. This meant that many military projects for weapons that were no longer needed were cancelled, but Draper saw this as an opportunity to work on the self-contained inertial navigation system he'd been thinking about for years, and based on his extensive experience of gyroscopes and stabilized platforms. Draper discussed this with Davis and realised that even though the war was over, based on the experience of bomber crews, new bombers and missiles would need navigation systems that were impervious to external jamming for long flights over enemy territory. However, a totally independent guidance system was seen by many top scientists as an impossible goal. As the war in Europe has already ended, the US had gathered Germany's top rocket engineers, led by Wernher von Braun, in Operation Paperclip. This brought them to the US to work on the next generation of missiles and eventually the Apollo moon missions for America. A key part of the rocket work was the guidance system that had been developed for the V-2 rocket. But the top brass of the US military were wary of having so many German scientists working on key technologies like guidance systems, which were to be used in many other applications. So while Draper may well have had what was seen by some as a far-fetched proposition, he and his team were seen as an essential alternative to the German teams, and contracts were given to Draper to prove he could make such a system. By 1949, Draper and his MIT team had created the 1,800-kilogram Phoebe inertial navigation system. However, due to the quality of the gyroscopes available at the time, gyro drift was a major issue and inaccuracies started to build up which could affect the course of the aircraft. So a solution was to use a celestial star tracker that would lock onto a celestial body or the sun once the aircraft was at a cruising altitude. This extra data would then allow for the inaccuracies to be corrected in flight, but Draper thought this was a temporary and not very elegant solution and could still be affected by weather, aurora, meteor showers and enemy countermeasures. Even without the star tracker, the accuracy of the gyro system was still good over moderate distances, and this was encouraging enough for the Air Force to issue a follow-on project to Draper's team at MIT to build and test a completely self-contained navigation and guidance system using just inertial and gravitational inputs. The project was named Space Inertial Reference Equipment, or SPIRE. One of the biggest issues that had to be overcome was the direction of vertical, or where the centre of the Earth was in comparison to the moving guidance system, and this was crucial to any inertial guidance unit. You see, in a gyro system, once the gyros are spinning in their gimbals and the exterior of the system is moved in any direction, the gyros will try and stay in the same orientation as when they started. This is what the inertial in inertial guidance means, and it's what makes gyros so very useful. Once the inertial guidance system is in an aircraft, for example, and it's initialized on the ground at the start of a flight, when the aircraft is moving in flight, be that pitching up or down, rolling about its longitudinal axis or yawing, the stabilized platform always remains in the same relative position to the ground where it was initialized, and therein lays the problem. The Earth, contrary to what flat earthers will have you believe, is not flat, and as a plane moves along, it is going round a giant sphere, and therefore it is no longer perpendicular to the ground where it started. The further it goes, the more the inertial guidance system becomes tilted out of alignment compared to its starting point. This is where, to many in the scientific community, this seemed to be an impossible task, because, based on Einstein's general theory that an observer inside a closed box could not distinguish between the effects of linear acceleration from the effects of a gravity field itself. Here the guidance system is the observer in the closed box and can't tell the difference between the plane accelerating in a climb or a dive from normal gravity in a flat level cruise. But Draper's team had already figured out that if they used a dampened pendulum that would always point towards the centre of the Earth and linked it to a servo mechanism, then the whole assembly could be kept perpendicular to the ground wherever they were. Although this system could tell when it was in a moving vehicle, it couldn't tell how far it had travelled. To do that, Draper added highly accurate accelerometers on the same three axes as the gyroscopes and an electronic clock. Now the movement could be calculated over time, and this could be used to tell how far the system had travelled and in which direction. All these electrical signals were then fed into an analog computer, along with a programmable flight route which would tell the system where to go. The output of the computer was then interfaced to the flight controls of an aircraft, and in theory it should be able to fly it from one place to another without any external input or signals. By 1953, the system had been tested several times, and Draper was so convinced that it would work that he arranged to fly from Massachusetts to California the day before a top-secret government-sponsored conference on inertial guidance that was scheduled to begin in Los Angeles on Monday the 9th of February 1953. The spy system was loaded into a B-29 on loan from the US Air Force, and after a few test flights they took off for California. It should be noted that this first version didn't do automatic takeoff and landing, so they waited until it was at 10,000 feet before the switchover. Everything went well until they got over the Rocky Mountains when they ran into dense cloud cover. The plane then hit turbulence and turned to the right by 10 to 12 degrees, which panicked the pilot who was watching the wheel. Draper knew something was happening because he could see the gimbals moving a lot with respect to the aircraft, but Draper told the pilot to let it carry on and see what it did. Spire eventually leveled the plane out and they carried on to California. What they didn't know until after the flight was that they'd hit a weather front over the Rockies and were being blown off course. Spire detected this and made a course correction to bring it back on track, and when the cloud cover broke, they could see they were exactly on course once more. After they had landed, the actual accuracy could be worked out from the data recorded from the 12-hour flight over 2,600 miles or 4,190 kilometers. Bearing in mind that this was the first full-scale test of a prototype system and relying on nothing more than mechanical gyroscopes, accelerometers and an analog computer, it was within 9 nautical miles or 16.6 kilometers. This proved beyond any doubt that inertial guidance could be used for long-distance navigation. By 1962, it had been developed and was the inertial navigation system for the Polaris submarine-launched ballistic missile. By then, it had gone from 1,200 kilograms and the size of a large refrigerator to 63 kilograms and the size of a large basketball. Over the 2,500 mile or 4,000 kilometer range of the Polaris, the accuracy was now within 900 meters, but that would gradually get better and better over the coming years. On the 9th of August 1961, the Instrumentation Laboratory was awarded the very first Apollo contract to design and build a fully integrated, deep space capable guidance, navigation and control system for manned missions to the moon, with the capability to go to Mars and beyond. Key workers from the Polaris development team contributed to the Apollo guidance system, and their choice to use the newly developed integrated circuit technology over individual transistor components for the guidance computer to keep the weight, size and power requirements to a minimum kick-started the miniaturization of electronics which we now take for granted today. Since then, mechanical gyroscopes have been replaced by a host of new and highly accurate technologies like MEMS or micro-electromechanical systems, which can be directly embedded into silicon, which allow complete systems to be built onto a chip. To give you an example of how things have progressed, the VN200 from VectorNav is a miniature, high-performance GPS-aided inertial navigation system that combines 3-axis gyros, accelerometers, magnetometers, a highly sensitive GPS receiver, and the computing power to provide optimal estimates of position, velocity and altitude, and all in a package the size of just 24mm by 22mm by 3mm, and requiring just 440 milliwatts of power and weighing in at just 4 grams. Doc Draper started an entire industry and rightly became known as the father of inertial navigation, which made both MIT and the Instrumentation Laboratory, which was spun off into an independent entity years later, into world leaders. And the spin-offs from it have found their way into many of the things we use in everyday life, from smartphones to cars, drones, planes, ships, spacecraft, to name but a few. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please thumbs up, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.